Good evening, everyone. I'm Judy Gradwell, Christy Walton, President and CEO here at the San Diego Natural History Museum, and I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight. Before we get started, I want to recognize and pay our respects to the indigenous peoples who are the traditional stewards of the land. Kumeyaay people have lived in this region since time immemorial. Through colonization, they were removed and their traditional knowledge was minimized. But Kumeyaay people have persisted. They remain part of this land and society today. The museum honors their continued legacy of understanding and protecting nature. Creating genuine and mutually beneficial partnerships is an ever-growing process, and the museum is committed to nurturing our budding relationships with our Kumeyaay collaborators and others. If you're here tonight, you probably know that we live in an extraordinary place. You may not know that San Diego County is the most biologically diverse county in the continental United States. To quote Leslie Handa at the San Diego Audubon, it is also the birdiest county in the US. That said, we've already lost more than 60% of our original natural areas. There has never been a more critical time to be here for nature and to be here for birds. Here at the Nat, we've been a quiet but effective force for nature in our region for nearly, it's 150 years this year. This is our anniversary year. We were founded in 1874, so our actual anniversary is in October. But 150 years is pretty remarkable for San Diego. It was, we were founded by a group of amateur naturalists in 1874. And since that time, we've carried their legacy forward by working to study, document, and conserve and inspire people about the natural world in our region, which includes Southern California and the Baja California Peninsula. We're very proud. We've been binational from the start. Every day, our scientists are identifying new species, unlocking the relationships between plants and animals, and using science to conserve threatened and endangered species. In the coming years, you'll hear us be a louder, stronger voice and an active player in preserving the natural world. It makes me sad to think we've spent 150 years documenting the slow decline of nature in San Diego, and it's time for us to work toward reversing that. And we expect all of you to be a part of that. The severe habitat loss definitely occurred on our watch, and it made San Diego the world-class city it is today, but it's time to preserve what we have left in the face of climate change, pollution, and invasive species. Before we begin the program, I have a few reminders for everyone. First of all, emergency exits are located both behind me and behind you. And while we do ask that you silence your cell phones, we encourage you to continue tonight's conversation on social media using hashtag Nat Talk. I also want to apologize for the heat in here. We are not running the air conditioning because we're apparently waiting for a part. And so we thought, well, we're just going to set the mood for a really hot talk by making the room warm too. So let's get to the program. This season of Nat Talks is made possible by presenting sponsored Downing Family Foundation and our media partner, KPBS, the public media stations serving San Diego and Imperial counties. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Travis Chemnitz, the Executive Director of San Diego Audubon, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you to the San Diego Natural History Museum for opening up your doors and increasing access to tonight's Bird Festival keynote talk. So not only are we able to fill this auditorium, excuse me, I was talking a lot already. Not only were we able to fill this auditorium, but we have live streaming going on to increase access to one of the most important talks that we've been able to provide to those that are here for our organization and here for birds and here for nature. I'm the executive director of San Diego Audubon Society, and together we defend the region's birds, unique biodiversity, and threatened habitats through advocacy, education, and conservation. Together, in our mission statement, it signifies our commitment to inclusion. Birds are for all. Birds are the gateway for individuals to learn how to love and appreciate nature and themselves. Birds empower people to take action, and birds will help us to create a cleaner and healthier world. And that is why tonight is so critical for us. It is actually our 75th anniversary, so we need to catch up with Nat here. But out of those 75 years, I would say tonight is one of our most historical moments. And the reason is because we are all coming together to stand up to increase access to nature and to really start to take serious action to protect the environment. Christian Cooper is one of those courageous individuals that is helping to lead the way in breaking down barriers to access to nature. And that is why I'm so excited to introduce him tonight. Christian is the host and consulting producer for the National Geographic series, Extraordinary Birder. Disney Plus, if you haven't seen it, check it out. He serves on the administrative board of Cornell Lab of Ornithology and as vice president of New York City Audubon, where he advocates for greater, safer access to green spaces for all, with a focus on outreach in underserved communities. His memoir from Random House, Better Living Through Birding, hit the New York Times bestseller list. This is the book that will be available after the talk, and Christian will be around to sign that. So definitely make sure you get your copy. Now is the time for us to do more for nature and those most in need. I am sure Christian will inspire us all to do just that. No pressure, Christian. And without further ado, I'd love to welcome Christian Cooper.
I'm Christian Cooper, and I am a birder. Wow, red blue flying across the river.
The inspiring world of birds is all around you.
The fun of birding
Do you see the owls right there?
is you never know what you're gonna get.
This guy is getting you up high and up close.
This is what birding is about.
Extraordinary Birder with Christian Cooper takes flight Saturday, June 17 on Nat Geo Wild.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Is this working right? Okay, great. First of all, I want to thank San Diego Audubon for having me here, and also thank the San Diego Natural History Museum for opening their doors to me to be able to talk to you today. It's very generous, very kind, and I'm very honored to be here. I wanted to start off with that clip from my show, or the promo for my show, not only for shameless promotional purposes, not only because it showed some great birds, some of which you can find right here in San Diego County, like Costa's hummingbird and bald eagle, but because the title of the show is Extraordinary Birder. Much as I would love that to be about me, it's not. I'm a birder, I got some skills, but I am by no means an extraordinary birder. What the title refers to is the people we meet in the show as we go to a lot of different places around the country, and we examine the birds that are there, but also the birds and the people issues, and how when birds and people come together, there are successes, there are failures, and how can we do better? And that's some of what the show explores. And in the process of doing the show and traveling around the country, I've had the privilege to meet the extraordinary birders, the people who are the names and the faces of the future of birding. And I want to introduce you to some of them here to begin with. For example, Christopher Joe. I met him down in Alabama. He works in an area called the Black Belt, which is a rural, agricultural and poor area. Called the Black Belt because of the richness of the soil that makes it look black, but also because it has been worked for centuries by Black people. First in the days of slavery, then as hired people on the hands of white-owned farms. But for the Joes, they've owned for several generations, owned their own farm. And if you can imagine the difficulty of farming and keeping a farm going economically, add to that the challenges of being Black and all the barriers that are put in your way with that on top of that. And the Joes have faced some serious issues, but they've come up with a remarkable solution to help them keep their farm running, which is that They just don't raise cattle on their farm. What they discovered, and Chris Joe, was familiar with birds from growing up on a farm. He just knew them. And what they found was that, wait, we can manage the land not only for the cattle, but also to provide maximal habitat for the birds. And birders will actually come and pay to bird on our farm and look at these amazing birds like the swallow-tailed kite, which is spectacular. So it's become this win-win-win situation where the Joes have a better chance at making their farm a going concern. The birders have a place to come and see this spectacular creature, and these spectacular creatures have more habitat. So that's Christopher Joe in Alabama. Then, very close to here, there's Marie and Glenna Barrett, a mother and daughter team who are working really hard to save the burrowing owl. Yeah, I know. Burrowing owls always make everybody go, oh. But the problem, or the great thing, again, another win-win in the burrowing owl situation is that, in the croplands of the Imperial Valley, where so much of the nation's crops come from, these birds have a feast on the bugs that would otherwise ruin the crops. Good for the farmers, good for the birds. But the heavy farming machinery that works the land too often was crushing the burrows for the burrowing owls. And so Marie and Glenna have been busy creating concrete burrows that the birds look at that, they're like, hey, that's better than the burrow I made. And they move in, and it's much more secure and stable, and the birds have a better chance at survival. More future names and faces in birding. Back home in my hometown in New York City, Chris Alieri has been working to save the piping plover. This is Clark Kent. He's a male piping plover that returns every year to the beaches of New York City. Yes, New York City has beaches. It is a city of islands, and so we've got a lot of shoreline. Chris Alieri gathered a whole bunch of volunteers to go forth during the breeding season and just educate beachgoers about, hey, there are these other beachgoers who share the beach with us. And if we just change some of our habits, we'll be able to coexist. They'll be able to survive because they're endangered and they're threatened by our use of the beach. He did that on his own. And then finally, on the right there, you can see Jose Salguero. And this is in Puerto Rico, where they took an old sugar plantation and they've been reforesting it. But they wanted to know, well, are our efforts succeeding? What's going on? We can't monitor the woods visually 24/7 to see what birds are there and what birds aren't. But they could hook up not speakers, but rather recording devices in the woods to monitor for 24/7. And then they have Jose come in, because when we can't call Jose a bird watcher, we have to call him a birder because he doesn't watch them. He's blind, as you can probably tell from the cane. And so Jose comes in and he listens to the recordings made in those 24 hours and picks out, with his incredible ability to sort sound, what birds have come back to the forest. And they've had enough success that this bird has come back to the area, to the swamplands there. The limpkin was gone from Puerto Rico for good, or so they thought. And one of the things they found is in their efforts, they managed to bring the limpkin back. So those are some of the future names and faces of birding. What I find very exciting about this is that it's a fairly random sample. And yet here you have pictured in this group of people, at least two different sexual orientations. You've got Black people, white people, Latino people, old people, young people. You've got people with disabilities. You've got the gamut of diversity. And that really brings home to me a really important point that I want to make, which is that if we want to protect the world's diversity of birds, we've got to have a diversity of people who are in the game to protect them. Okay, you guys are clapping. It's kind of an easily approvable, easy sentiment to approve of. But I want to come back to it later to really dig into why that's true, why that's so important. So that's the future of birding, if we're going to put a name to the future of birding. But in order to do that, to make that statement true, to really get that diversity going and keep it going from what I just showed you, we've got to remove barriers that might prevent people from joining birding. And this is where I'm going to dig right into it. And I'm going to look back at the past of birding and how that may actually present a barrier to a lot of people becoming active in birding. So we're going to talk about what's been a big controversy for a long time. And I'm going to apologize in advance to all you guys, because I know you probably want to see a lot of pretty birds, and you'll see some pretty birds in the course of this presentation. But I really want to talk about us. I want to talk about the birders and the future of birding. So that's where I'm really going to zero in. And the big controversy for a while now has been about names. Names like Audubon, names like the common names of the birds that we use. And one thing I want to do right off the bat is I want to be absolutely clear that there's a variety of opinion on this, and that, you know, if you fall on one side or the other, it doesn't make, you know, one or the other a raging racist or a raging whatever. And in fact, I want us all right now, I want everybody to turn to the person next to you on the other side and just say hello. Because too often we let ourselves fall into these polarized camps. You know, we get set in our ways, and I want to make it absolutely clear, and I can only speak for myself, because I come down very strongly on one side of this whole names debate, as we will see, and we'll talk about it. But I will say for myself that I will work across the lines with anybody who puts the protection of the birds first. And everybody in this room, I will wager, puts the protection of the birds first. So whatever our differences on this issue, we need to reach across those differences and keep working for the protection of the birds. All right, so the controversy, the big one, Audubon. What's controversial about Audubon? Well, it's interesting. I was really of two minds of this for the longest time, because I've been birding for, I'm embarrassed to say, half a century. And for most of that time, Audubon meant nothing more nor less than the protection of wild birds. So it's only in recent years that more has come to light about the history of John James Audubon. It's not that it wasn't known, it wasn't there before, but it wasn't publicly disseminated. It wasn't in the consciousness. And it became known that Audubon owned slaves, traded slaves, fiercely advocated for the continuation of slavery. At a time when other people were saying, no, slavery is awful, morally reprehensible, and had to go. He was like, no, slavery, it's all good. Funded his work. Also participated in some desecration of Native American graves to get those skulls to people who were doing racist research on skulls to prove that, hey, white people are better than indigenous people because look at the skulls, which of course we now know is a lot of nonsense. So there's a lot of ugliness in the history of John James Audubon. There's also a lot of beauty. And I can say that as somebody who lives in New York, and there's a place called the New York Historical Society that has not the prints, not the giant folio prints, but the actual paintings that John James Audubon did, that those prints were made from, and they are exquisite. They are, you can't deny the man's eye for detail, for beauty, for dynamism, all of it on the page. So, you know, these are two different ideas we have to hold in our mind about Audubon. But the fact that Audubon was so heavily involved in slavery is a barrier to a lot of people in getting involved in an organization that bears that name. Similarly, we've got another controversy now. This bird, the Scots oriole, except it's not going to be the Scots oriole for very much longer. The reason being that it's been decided that the common names of birds are no longer going to bear people's names. We call it eponymous naming of birds. All people names are going to be stripped away from birds, and they're going to get new names. Again, lots of controversy on this. Some people are really upset. Some people think, yeah, that's the way to go, because a lot of these people did a lot of awful things. Not all of them. Some of them were great people. Some of them were awful people. But because those awful histories attached to so many of these names are there, It's something that has to go from birding so that we can bring everybody along with us. And that's an attitude I agree with. And I'm going to go into some of the things I've heard in response to the whole naming controversy. I'm going to talk about 12 different things. I'm going to explain, why I feel aren't valid arguments against the changes in the names. But then I also want to open it up and talk about just diversity in general as I get further into the presentation. So what are some of those things that I've heard against the name change? Nobody knows about that stuff. That was true. That was true. I didn't know. Again, I said I've been birding for 50 years, and it's only in recent years that I'm like, oh, this Audubon guy. Damn. Not good. So, but the thing is, word is getting out. This is me in Freeport, Illinois in the summer of 2020. So 4 years ago almost. Nice town, Midwestern town. They had me out there because they had decided to do a bird festival of their own. Not so much about getting people birding, though that was part of it for the young students, but also sort of like their museum did a bird exhibit. They had bird photography in all the cafes around town. And the guy who organized it, Barry Treyu there, did an incredible job. One of the things he had me do was, because he asked me to come out for this, he had a town hall type forum, which had questions and answers from the largely Black community that lives in Freeport. And, I'm there answering a lot of questions. And I got a question I never expected to hear, which was, what do you think about the name Audubon? And this is back in 2020. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is an audience of mostly Black people who are not birders. These were people from the local community who are maybe a little bit interested in finding out more about birding or, finding out what happened to me, but they were not birders. And already in 2020, they were asking the question, what about that name Audubon? Because it was on people's minds. So if you think people don't know, I got another story for you. This newspaper, I brought a prop. This newspaper I picked up on Sunday. All right, so for those of you who don't know, I'm a nerd, and I spent noon on Sunday to noon on Monday in a movie theater in the Boston area watching 24 hours of continuous science fiction movies. Happens every year. But in a break between movies, I ran across the street to get some ice cream from this ice cream parlor. He had a chocolate shake. And I see this newspaper lying there. And I'm like, ooh, a Townsend's warbler. Why is that on the front of the newspaper? And I pick it up and I read, this songbird's visit. So a Townsend's warbler, which is a Western bird, had shown up in Massachusetts. I'm like, whoa, cool. This songbird's visit and its unfortunate name focuses attention on very different side of ornithology and a sometimes grim history. So if you think people don't know, a randomly picked up newspaper in Massachusetts within this very week, and they're talking about this. So people know, word is getting out there. It is true that once upon a time, people didn't know. People know now. 2, nobody cares about that stuff. All right. You can't really get away with saying that because obviously if nobody cared about it, there wouldn't be all this controversy and there wouldn't be an attempt to change the name. So somebody cares about it. I guess the better way of phrasing this would be nobody should care about that stuff. To illustrate why I don't think that's a valid argument, we're going to do a little thought experiment. Bear with me here. Behold Hitler's warbler. Okay? Right? Okay? That's exactly it. That's terrible. I mean, just imagine that. Imagine, I was going to say, just imagine any Jewish person having to have that cross their lips. Imagine any human person having to have that cross their lips to say, oh, there goes a Hitler's warbler. No, no. So yes, there's a reason why people care about it. And it's because it can be pretty atrocious. Now, you may look at me and say, all right, you picked this extreme example. And you're right. I did create an extreme example. Oh, wait. Scott's Oriole. Do you guys know who General Winfield Scott was? This is General Winfield Scott, who presided over the Trail of Tears, where indigenous people were forced out of their homes to cross half the continent, and thousands of them died in the process. So if you think I'm exaggerating by saying Hitler's warbler, think again. This guy had no connection to ornithology. As far as we know, he had no interest in birds or preserving nature. It's just some private who happened to, quote unquote, discover Scott's oriole. Not that it hadn't been known by human beings before then. They just happened not to be European ancestry settlers. And he brought this to Western science and said, I'm going to name it after my old general, General Winfield Scott. And that's why we have crossing our lips. Every time we look at this beautiful bird, we've got to say the words Scott's oriole. That's why people care. 3, moral judgments are subjective. This is absolutely true. Moral judgments are subjective. I don't think you can make much of an argument against, no, there shouldn't be a Scott's oriole named for General Winfield Scott, but there's lots of gray area in a lot of other places. Who's going to judge? By what criteria? Yesterday's, today's, tomorrow. What about tomorrow? Who knows how our standards of morality are going to evolve tomorrow? And are we going to look back and we're going to say, oh, well, that Christian Cooper was a cad. He shouldn't have a Cooper's hawk named after him. It's not named after me. But who isn't flawed in somebody's eyes, right? It's true. There is no arguing with this. The American Ornithological Society decided we're not going to argue about it. They're the ones who control the common names in English in the Americas, and they said, you're absolutely right. We should not be in the business of making moral judgments. That's why we're going to get rid of all the eponymous names. We're not going to play games with arbitrating, oh, this guy was kind of bad, but not bad enough. This guy was awful. This guy was great. Nope, they're not doing it. They're getting rid of all the eponymous names. And that means going forward in the future, it really doesn't matter what moral judgments are made because none of the birds will have people's names attached to them. So I think that's the most brilliant thing that the AOS did, was to make that call. This one comes up a lot. It erases history. Think back to 1 or 2, because points number 1 and 2, that nobody knows and it doesn't matter. This completely contradicts those first 2, but let's take it on its own merits. It erases history. And let's for a second go back to that thought experiment. Hitler's warbler does not exist. There is no Hitler's warbler. Raise your hand if you know who Hitler was. Raise your hand if you know what he did. That's the point. It doesn't erase anybody's history. All it does is detach the history from a bird that had no connection to that history whatsoever. The bird has been around for millions or hundreds of thousands at least years, doing what the bird does and creating this artificial connection to a person and their history is problematic in a lot of ways. And one of them is in this way. You guys know what that bird is? That really pretty bird? That's a yellow-bellied sapsucker, or as you may also know it, a biscaynic. You're like, wait, what? Biscaynic, what? Again, my nerd culture has served me again here because I watched the Marvel series Echo, which features a Choctaw superhero. And this bird kept showing up. And I'm like, why do they keep showing the yellow-bellied sapsucker? I don't get it. Well, I dug and did a little research, and it turns out in Choctaw legend and mythology, this bird is key. It's the bird, its tapping was said to be a way that messages were sent to the Choctaw tribe to warn them. And they have called it, long before we called it a yellow-bellied sapsucker, they called it a biscaynic. And they still call it a biscaynic. And they actually have their tribal newspaper is called the Biscaynic because it's that tapping to send out messages to the tribe. Now imagine if somebody came along with some explorer of European ancestry had come along and said, hey, I'm going to call this Cooper sapsucker. Well, okay, but is that really, if we remove that name, is that really altering history? Whose history? Because it was called a biscaynic long before it was called a Cooper sapsucker. So when you say it erases history, you've really got to look in a broader context and recognize that for a long time, there was this trend in the 1800s of explorers of European ancestry slapping these names on these birds to honor people that they wanted to honor, probably, almost certainly, more people of European ancestry. But that's not history. That's not the history of the bird. And the bird has had a history known to humanity in most cases, like the Biscayneck to the Choctaw, long before that. So if you think it's erasing history, it's actually probably, by changing the name and getting rid of a person's name that was randomly attached to it, we're probably restoring the history, bringing it closer to its original history. It politicizes birding. You know what? Go right back to what I was just talking about, how we had a trend in the 1800s of settlers of European ancestry, of explorers of European ancestry, slapping the names of their heroes onto birds. If that's not a political act, what is? And that's the thing. When we grow up, like me growing up with the name Audubon and not thinking twice about it, you know, we grow up in a certain context and we take it for granted. We think it's always been that way. It becomes the norm, it becomes the default, and we don't question it. And when someone says, oh, maybe we should change this, we're like, oh my God, you're making this political. It's always been political. It's just a matter of, are we going to open this up so in a way that embraces more people and as many people as possible, rather than having it apply to just a narrow view of history that we've all been acculturated to, but that doesn't embrace everybody. Nobody ever walked away from birding because of the names. Hard to know whether or not that's true, because if they walked away, you're not going to know it. But I will wager that that probably is true, because the birds are spectacular. Anyone who is drawn to the birds is not going to give those birds up because of the offensive names that some people have attached to them. So they're probably not going to walk away from birding. But you know what they are going to do? They're going to walk away from our organizations that have said, oh yeah, this naming thing, it doesn't really matter to us. It's no big deal. Those people who are offended by the names will go elsewhere. How do I know this? Meet my sister, Melody Cooper. So she called me up one day and I was like, the names thing had just broken. No, I'm sorry. The Audubon thing the Audubon name change thing had just broken. The National Audubon had decided that they weren't going to change their name. So my sister called me about something else. I'm like, oh God, my day is hell because I'm dealing with this Audubon thing. And she's like, what Audubon thing? And I'm like, oh, National is, you know, the Audubon controversy. She's like, what controversy? I'm like, you've been living adjacent, birding adjacent for 50 years now, and you don't know about this? How can you not know about this? So exactly what we said at the beginning, you know, people don't know, but they find out. So she found out because I explained in the most nonpartisan terms, you know, look, this is the controversy. And I can be nonpartisan about it because I myself was conflicted about it. I'm like, yeah, well, it just means protecting birds. But yeah, as a Black person, boy, is that offensive. So I'm like, so I gave her the 50-50 presentation. So she found out, like I said, people find out. She said, well, what did National Audubon decide to do? Because she had a solicitation, happened to have it on her desk, a solicitation from National Audubon asking for money. And she said, well, what did they decide to do? And I said, well, they decided to keep the name. Her immediate, instant reaction was expletive deleted that, and she ripped the solicitation in half and threw it in the trash. So people find out, and when they find out that our organizations were like, no big deal, they judge harshly and quickly. And that's what she did. Is that what we want? Is that what we want for our organizations? You may decide, you know what? I'd rather let those people go and keep these names, but recognize what that's going to do to your organization. I, for one, want to see everybody involved in the groups we have pulling together. And so that's why I'm saying we need to let these names go, because it's a barrier to people like my sister. It's performative. This one hurts me because I hate performative stuff. And here I am going to, I'm just going to put it out there. I hate land acknowledgements. And I know we started with one here, and this one was actually one of the better ones I've heard. But, you know, as the land acknowledgement goes on, and I'm just sitting there, and at the end of it, I'm like, So you're giving the land back? And of course, nobody's giving the land back. So I'm like, well, then it's performative. It's, you know, you're just trying to, yeah. I will put an asterisk on that because a lot of people don't know the history of the land and don't know the tribes with that were there or are there. It's not a past tense thing. And so this is a great way to get that. Well, not a great way. It's a way to get that knowledge out there. What I would prefer is where people, and this is actually what San Diego Audubon is doing, is incorporate the tribes, incorporate their knowledge, incorporate their history, make it a part of what you do. For example, I spend part of my year in Palm Springs where the Cahuilla are all over Palm Springs. It's their land. And, you know, I sometimes talk about, yeah, well, I should go up to the top of Taquashemke and go see if I can find some white-headed woodpeckers there. Oh yeah, Taquashemke, that's the name from the Cahuilla use for Mount San Jacinto. So, you know, you just work it into, that's the way I prefer to do it, but I digress. I find this performative. What's not performative is to change the names. It would be performative if I started every organization meeting with, hello, everybody. And now I would like to start by saying that some of you may find some of the names we use in birding offensive, and we acknowledge that this may be painful for you to you, blah, 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 without actually changing the names and doing something to fix it. This is actually changing the names and doing something to fix it. It is not performative. And more importantly, it is not a cure-all to the problems of lack of diversity in our organizations, but it's a start. It is a message to those of us who have not always felt included that, yeah, you know what? We can make this change, which is a fairly easy change and a fairly common sense change to make sure that the doors are open for you. Hello. There we go. It will lead to other performative acts in science. I've actually read this one. First of all, I feel it's not performative to change the names, but more than that, this is a classic slippery slope argument. Sort of like when people said, hey, you know, if we legalize same-sex marriage, people will be marrying their dogs next. How many dog marriages do you guys know of in the years since same-sex marriage became legal? So it's a way of, rather than evaluating something on its merits, of projecting these scenarios that may or may not occur as if you are Cassandra with knowledge of the future. Bottom line, nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. That's why we should evaluate things on their own merits in the here and now and make our decision based on that, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know, or we didn't know that if we gave Black men the vote, that women would get the vote next, or that we'd have a Black president. God forbid these horrible things should happen. So, you know, I dismiss slippery slope arguments entirely. Whoops, too far. Stability of names is important. This is absolutely correct. Stability of names is important, but we change the common names all the time. Look at the marsh hawk. Oops, I mean the northern harrier. Look at the Audubon's warbler. Oops, I mean the yellow-rumped warbler. Oh, look at the Baltimore oriole. Oops, I mean the northern oriole. Oops, I mean the Baltimore oriole. And you know what? We didn't have a meltdown. We got used to it fairly quickly. So ask yourself why this particular name change has caused so much concern. 10, wasting time on this diverts resources away from conservation. This is important because it could be true. And we can't afford to waste time, energy on something that doesn't protect the birds, because we're at a crucial point where we've got to do everything we can to protect them. So is this true? Yeah, it is somewhat true. I don't think it's as true as some people would have you believe, that, you know, oh my goodness, our organizations will be incapable of doing anything else while this name change is going on. Well, that's not true either. But there is a possibility that making these name changes will divert some energy and resources from conservation in the short term. Here's where it gets interesting. Go back to Chris Alieri and his attempt to protect the piping plover on Rockaway Beach in New York City. That little bird. This is the community of Edgemere. It is a largely Black community on the Rockaway Peninsula where these birds nest. You can see the outlines of Edgemere by the dotted line. And in a classic bit of bias about, I don't know, in the 1920s or something like that, the decision was made to close off a section of the beach permanently so that it could be used by wildlife. And guess whose beach they picked? So this has been in place for many, many decades, but in the process, the birds have taken over this beach, and there are piping plovers, American oyster catchers, Elise terns, all these birds breeding on that section of the beach. Because we have not done the work of including everybody in birding, of bringing everyone into birding, there's nobody there who recognizes the tremendous resource they have. I shouldn't say nobody, but there's not enough people who realize the resource they have with those birds breeding on the beach. You know, there's going to have to be some sort of compromise solution to this issue, but boy, would Chris's job be easier if there were more people who were like, oh no, the birds are remarkable. They're great. It's so great that we have them because, you know, birds are fabulous for all these different reasons. And they're a resource for our kids here in our community. But there's not enough people who understand that. That's why it's so important that we open up birding to everybody. That's why taking the time to do this now and spending the energy to do this now will pay off dividends in the future. Make it even simpler for you. Imagine going to the Black representative of this district who you've got to try to get politically on your side and saying, hey, I'm from New York City Audubon. Bam, right there. The eyes glaze over. Oh yeah, the organization with the name of the slaveholder. That's not what we want. So for the long term of conservation, it's really important that we get the names right. All right, so how do we do that? How do we increase diversity then? Because since diversity is so important, because it's the right thing to do, that's why we should do it. I know that's really boring. So here's the other reason, because it's crucial to saving the birds. Why is it crucial to saving the birds? Because our nation's demographics are changing over time. There's no good or wrong or good or bad or right or wrong about it. It's just a fact that the demographics are changing. If birding remains an overwhelmingly white occupation or a hobby, then we will find ourselves marginalized into less and less relevance. Takeaways: slower growing, but more multinational, more multiracial society is where our country is heading. If we don't engage non-white people who value the birds in their habitats, no constituency for their protection, as we're finding in Edgemere. And people of color, because of various long-held biases and structural barriers, don't get exposed to nature as much. It's our job to make sure that they are exposed to nature, that they develop a love of nature, so that we have people who believe in the birds and believe in protecting the birds. Otherwise, we'll be irrelevant. 11, we should devote more time and energy to real efforts to bring more communities into birding, not waste time on these trivialities. This assumes that we cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. We can change these names and at the same time do a whole lot of things to bring other people into birding. And I'm going to try to flip through these very quickly. I'm going to give some examples of how we can make sure that we are being as open as possible, including as many people as possible. Some of these will be incredibly common sense. Some of them will be new. Some of them you're already doing. But how to do it, the answer is there's no easy answer. But we're still going to go through some examples that'll maybe clarify things in a birding context. So, disclaimer, I haven't made a lifetime career of studying this, and some of these are obvious, but let's see what we can come up with. Example: if you have a young person of color who shows an interest in birds, introduce him or her to citizen science efforts like eBird. Being part of a larger project can help people engage, help keep people engaged. What's wrong with that from an inclusivity standpoint? Anybody? Pronouns. What's wrong with that example? Introduce him or her to citizen science. And this is where we've got to realize that, again, pronouns them, much more inclusive. Whether somebody, chooses gender neutral pronouns or whether it's someone who identifies as male or someone who's female, you're covered better if you use them, because diversity is multifactorial. It's not just race. It's not just ethnicity. There's a whole bunch of diversities that we want to bring in because we need all hands on deck to protect the birds. Also, citizen science. Oops. You know what? A lot of people aren't citizens. They may be residents. They may be here, quote unquote, illegally. And I'm not going to get into the whole immigration thing because there's lots of arguments to be made on all kinds of sides about that. But if you are here, I want you defending the birds. So community science is a much more inclusive term. You're not saying, oh, you can only be concerned about this if you're a citizen. Oh, did I go too far? Community science, sexual orientation, not sexual. Language is a minefield. Yes, sorry. That's the other thing to keep in mind is that the language you use, oh my God, can you put your foot in it? I experience this all the time with my sister's youngest, who is gender non-binary, and I am messing up the pronouns all the time, and I am as well-intentioned as I can be, and she hasn't even decided sometimes. See, I just said she. They haven't decided sometimes what pronoun they want. So it's a minefield. It's hard. It's not easy, but you got to make your best efforts. And also get them while they're young. That's really important for, I think, diversity. If you can hook the youngsters, they often bring their whole families with them. And then you're really getting a handle on increasing diversity. Another example. This one's good. All are welcome on a bird walk in one of the best locations for birds in all of Southern California. Beginners welcome, Sunday, October 2nd, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. So grab your binoculars and join us. What's wrong with this from a diversity standpoint? Oh, I'm hearing good ones. Church, go on. Grab your binoculars. All right, so let me run through them since I don't want us to run out of time. If you're trying to what's wrong with this example? All are welcome on a bird walk. Okay, what if you're in a wheelchair? Accessibility is important. Southern California, right? Oh, but before I even get there, picture. What's wrong with that picture? It shows white people. If you want people to come, you got to show them people that look like them. Or at least not show them people who don't look like them, as if that's all that's going to be there. Southern California, oh, you know what? That ought to be in Spanish as well as in English. And I'm delighted to see here in the museum, every place I go, it's in English and Spanish. Sunday, October 2nd, a couple of people said, church, if you're trying to get Black people and even some Latino people, if you do something on a Sunday morning, a lot of them will be in church. And you're going to miss out on pulling those people in. So grab your binoculars. As you said, a lot of people don't have binoculars. It can be a big barrier to entry in birding. So you want to make sure you have binoculars around for on loan. I'm just wondering, I've talked about all these things already. So binoculars can be the biggest barrier of entry. So this is the revised one. All are welcome. Look at the picture. Pretty bird, even better. All are welcome to a birding outing on Saturday. Binoculars will be available on loan, otro lado, en español. So that's how you make things a little bit more inclusive and try to pull people in. Here's a negative example. And this is where I failed once. We had someone on our board who was dynamic, Latina, and really engaged and getting people out there in the field. And we invited her to join our board, and she kept floundering in some respect. And finally she said, I don't have the tools that Dorothy has as a white woman, Dorothy being another person on the board. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And I should have known better, because I felt the same thing when I started as a freshman at Harvard, and there are these Sultan stalls and cabins around me talking about their wintering in Gstaad. And I don't even know what a Gstaad is. But I felt like a fish out of water. Now, I quickly, happily learned that these guys don't know anything more than I do. They're not any better at this than I am. But unfortunately, I didn't recognize that this board member was having that same dislocation. I'd forgotten what that dislocation felt like. So nobody was mentoring her. No one was, explaining to her, look, this is how a board works. You may not have been on a board before, and there's this kind of structure. And, you know what? I'm going to help you through this and make sure that your voice is heard properly. And that didn't happen. And we lost her. And retention is the biggest issue that people have in organizations when they try to be inclusive. You may get them in initially, but holding them is another matter entirely. And the last bullet I want to focus on for a second, which is extreme cases may require concerted action. If there's somebody who is being outright hostile on a racial or ethnic level or sexual orientation level, whatever axis of identity you want to focus on, if someone is being outright hostile, you may have to ask that person to leave. And that's just the way it is if you want to broaden your appeal. Meet people where they are. And figuratively, that means, what are the concerns of the communities that you're working with? For example, in Edgemere, they have a right to be angry that historically they've been put upon that their beach was the beach that was closed. So how do we meet the people of Edgemere with their concern that they too have beach access and yet still protect the birds? That's what we're working on right now. But also literally meet people where they are, in that you might want to bring birding to their neighborhoods. And this is something I'm super proud of. It wasn't my idea, but as a member of New York City Audubon, our executive director started this new initiative called NYCHA in Nature. NYCHA being NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority. It's the projects. And so we now have a bunch of bird walks that go to the projects and take people in the projects on bird walks in their neighborhood. Are they seeing the fabulous birds that you get to see at something like the San Diego Bird Festival? No, but for people who haven't birded before, it's a way to get them started. And then eventually maybe they'll graduate to the fabulous birds that you can see at something like the San Diego Bird Festival. But get them started where they are, looking at the birds in their neighborhood. I used to poo-poo getting kids to look at pigeons. I'm like, oh my God, if I have to make these kids look at pigeons, I'm gonna blow my brains out. I have done a 180 on that entirely, because pigeons are where they are. Pigeons are what they see. There are all kinds of things they can observe about pigeons, like their mating behaviors, where they puff up the necks and they fan the tails and drop them. In terms of the color morphs that pigeons come in, the way people come in color morphs, and why with these feral pigeons that were bred to all these different colors and now have gone back into the wild and are now interbreeding, why haven't they gone back to the average generic color morph of a rock pigeon? They're still coming out in all these incredible colors. Why? So there's all kinds of things you can learn from pigeons. And, it's a way to meet people where they are. Of course, your local situation is going to change what you're going to do. Finally, 8, be creative. Come up with all kinds of solutions, try them, throw everything at the wall, see what sticks, and you will make mistakes, and you will fail, and you will have problems. And you know what? You pick yourself back up and you keep trying. So, diversity is multifactorial. Language is a minefield. Beware of unconscious bias. Consider accessibility. Be culturally sensitive. Retention is the hard part. Meet people where they are, and be creative and expect failure. 1 through 8. How many of these are you prevented from doing by changing the names of birds? This is why I say we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Finally, 12. It's a capitulation to woke ideology. I don't watch Fox News, so I don't know what this means. And it took a long time for me to sort of figure out, what is this? What does this mean? And I realized eventually what it means is that there is this way that things have been done for a long time. And because it's been done that way for a long time, it seems like forever, like the norm. We were talking about that earlier. And it's centered on being white, it's centered on being straight, it's centered on being male, it's centered on being Christian. And anything that isn't centered on that, well, Gosh, that should be dismissed automatically, regardless of its merits, because it frightens me. And we have terms now that we have workshopped, like woke, to trigger that fear mongering. That's what that means. And you know what? Quite honestly, diversity is hard. It is really hard. It's not easy. It forces you outside your comfort zone. It requires a constant and sustained effort. And like these slides, it's sideways. It forces you to look at things in a new way. But you know what? We are birders. Wait, let me do it from here. We are birders. We make a point of seeing things that other people miss. We look at them in new ways. We walk through the woods, and when other people are walking through, like, oh, there's nothing here. We're hearing all kinds of warblers. We're seeing wrens. We train our eye to be able to pick out motions that are different from a regular leaf fluttering in the wind. We have the skills to do this. So, you know, when we change the names, when we talk about changing the names, and people say, oh, it's woke, you know, I say, you know what? We need all hands on deck. We have lost 3 billion birds. 1/3 of the bird population of North America is gone. Gone. We cannot afford to not have all hands on deck in this effort. But it's not over. It is reversible. And I say that because I look at things like, you know, for the show, we went out to Fresh Kills in Staten Island in New York City, which used to be a garbage dump, the biggest garbage dump on the planet. Gulls loved it. But they capped it and put a park on it. Not just a park, grasslands. Grasslands birds, like this meadowlark, have been plummeting. They're the hardest hit by some measures of our birds. And all we had to do was make a little bit of new grassland, and all the grassland birds started coming back. Grasshopper sparrows, savanna sparrows, endangered sedge wrens in the middle of New York City because we gave them the room. We can reverse this if we have all hands on deck. And we have an opportunity because COVID has opened the door to a whole bunch of new birders joining us. And if we can keep them, if we can keep expanding our numbers, we can make the difference the birds need us to make. So when someone says, yeah, well, doing this is woke, I say, you know what? If I need to do something woke to have Chris Alieri have the backup he needs, so he's not, instead of fighting the community in Edgemere, he's having allies in the community of Edgemere. If I can have a dozen more Chris Joes operating farms that are also helping the birds, if we can have more Marie and Glenna Barrett's, more Jose Salgueros, if we can have Efwa Peterson here, who helped lead a whole diverse walk with me in Central Park, if we can have Q Lee, who is the descendant, the son, the child of first generation of Korean immigrants who now sits on the board of New York City Audubon, if we can have my own sister not rip up that solicitation and instead send money to our organizations, to our groups, if we can have somebody like Ramon Cruz, who was until recently the president of the Sierra Club, if we can have this range of diversity, and what it takes for that to happen is for me to do something that someone else is going to dismiss as woke, I say I am happy to be woke. Do you know why? Because birders are early risers. Questions? Okay, okay. Let's do it by hands. I'll get to you right there. Yep. Okay. Let me repeat that because people may not on the other side of the room may not be able to hear you. The comment was that her daughter gave her another reason for why we need to change the names of the bird, and that's because who are we to say that we somehow have ownership over another species? Okay, go ahead. So the question is, considering how much birding is popular around the world, why is birding so lack diversity so much here in the US? And I think it's exactly what you suggested, that there are a lot of structural barriers. One of them is economic. There have been lots of things that have kept some communities on down on the economic scale, from the fact that Black GIs were largely kept out of the GI Bill. They couldn't take advantage of it, and the GI Bill is what created vast amounts of wealth for a lot of people coming out of World War II. We couldn't take advantage of that. Redlining kept us from getting loans so that we could build businesses the way other communities could build businesses. So there were a lot of structural barriers, and are a lot of structural barriers that keep certain communities economically down. And when you're worrying about where the rent's going to come from, when you are working two jobs, that doesn't leave a lot of room for something like birding. Certainly doesn't necessarily make the money available to buy a pair of binoculars. If you're in that situation, you may not be sending your kid to summer camp, which is where a lot of kids get their first exposure and really develop a love for nature. So that can help to constrain it. Also, it's just history. If you look at, as I said, if you don't see people who look like you doing something, you're going to dismiss it as something that, we don't do that. That's one reason why I am thrilled to be doing Extraordinary Birder, because people tune in and they see, oh, there's a Black guy looking at birds. And I got this letter from this mother in Westchester, one of the suburbs outside of New York City, where she said, my daughter started to pay attention to birds at the end of the school year. And I thought, let me see if I can encourage this. So I had them watch your show. They've seen every episode 10 times and they quote you all the time. And they're turning into real birders. And the two little girls were Black. And I was like, oh, I am happy anytime anybody takes up birding, but especially when it's those of us who have been so underrepresented for so long. It is a validation to know that, just by being the face of a birding show, it's encouraging other people who look like me to say, hey, yeah, I can do that too. So question, someone up there raised their hand about a question about what is New York City Audubon doing? Yeah, so go ahead. Okay, so just a little disambiguation, as they say on Google when you look something up. There's Audubon New York, which is the state organization, and then there's New York City Audubon, which is the city organization. I am on the board of New York City Audubon. We voted to change our name, just as San Diego Audubon voted to change your name. We are in the process of picking a new name. We are really close to settling on something. And more than that, I cannot say, because there's going to be a big announcement when we finally do pull the trigger, but it will be soon. So, go ahead. So the question is, if the eponymous names are changing, what about the cedar waxwings and the bush tits? And I don't follow why their names might need to be changed. I gotcha. The AOS decided that only eponymous names have to change. Well, and then there were one or two other names that were, offensive, like the old name for the long-tailed duck was offensive. But by and large, it's the eponymous names that have to change because those are the ones that have a history attached to them that have nothing to do with the bird. The other names are generally descriptive, like cedar waxwing, because they're found in cedar trees. They're actually junipers, but we call them cedars. They're descriptive in some way. And, I don't have a problem with, calling a yellow-bellied sapsucker a yellow-bellied sapsucker because it is descriptive. And, it is useful to have a name in English because I don't speak Choctaw. But it's interesting, in Hawaii, they have reverted to the native names. And I think that's a decision that makes sense for Hawaii. And boy, was it hard when we did the Hawaiian episode. The words I had to fit into my mouth. I was like, the easiest one was the crow, the alala. But there was, I'm not even going to go there because I'm going to mangle it. But the hard names, but worth the effort to learn. Other question up there. Sure. I started, the question is, how did I become a birder and at what age? I became a birder at about age 9 or 10. And how did it happen? First of all, nature was always big in our household because my dad was a science teacher and particularly was interested in biology, was big on the great outdoors, always took us camping. For some reason with me, it took the particular form of birds. And my spark bird happened when, for reasons that are still unknown to me, my parents decided that I had to go to a summer woodshop class. And so I had to build either a bird feeder or a footstool. And happily I built the bird feeder because otherwise I might be a podiatrist today. And I put the bird feeder up in the backyard and I kept seeing these all black birds, except for a red patch on the wing, coming to the bird feeder. And I was like, oh my God, I've discovered a new species of crow. I've done this incredible scientific breakthrough as an 8-year-old. And then I found out, oh wait, they're red-winged blackbirds. But it still to this day remains one of my favorite birds. But that kind of got things started. And then not long after that, because my dad loved to take us camping and both my parents were teachers, so they had the summers off. So we spent a summer going on a cross-country camping trip all the way across Canada, down the West Coast, and then back through the States. And it was me, my sister, my mom, my dad, and the family Cocker Spaniel all crammed into a little Volkswagen Westphalia, pop-up top camper for the entire summer. Not a lot of room, and not a lot of room for things like books. So one of the few books that did come along, because my dad was a science teacher, was a field guide to the birds of North America. So, it's a lot of hours driving past cornfields. And, so I'm there flipping through the book, looking at the pretty pictures. And, I had a very young, impressionable plastic mind back then, not now. And we hit the West Coast and this bird goes flying by and I go, oh, look, Mom and Dad, there goes a black-billed magpie. And they're like, how the hell does he know that? It's because I remembered the book. So that really that's what got the ball started for me. And then, my dad just made sure that was fed. So, question all the way up the top. Remember what I said about how retention is the hard part? So when you make your efforts to bring folks in from other communities, make sure they know they are welcome. And that happened to me. My dad, because he saw that he had this bird crazy son on his hands, took me to one of the bird walks of the South Shore Audubon Society on the South Shore of Long Island, where I grew up. And I'm there and, I'm the only little black kid there with his dad, and everybody else there is white. But Elliot Kuttner was there. Elliot Kuttner was one of the founders of South Shore Audubon Society, a former president, and after he cycled through all his different roles, he was still leading the bird walks for the group. And he took one look at this bird crazy kid and he was like, this one's mine. And he made sure to nurture my interest and made sure he knew, my dad and I knew, that we were welcome. And that is the job of all of us, is to make sure. And it's something I try to do in Central Park because it was done to me in Central Park. And I'm very happy to be able to say this about the Central Park birding community, is that if you have an interest in the birds, you have to be expert. But if you show a genuine interest in the birds, we will take you in. And whenever I see someone in the park who I don't recognize, I haven't seen them before, I make a point of going over to them, saying hi. I'm like, oh, you know, finding out how they got started. These days, invariably, it's a pandemic birder, and we're like, we're glad to have you. And you try to make sure they feel welcome. Yeah, that's the kernel of it. And then, you know, there's things you can build off of that and elaborate on that. But the kernel is make sure everyone who shows up knows they're welcome and feels welcome. Because if you show up and you feel like, oh, no one's paying attention to me, nobody's happy that I'm here, are you going to come back? So, more questions? Hi. Oh boy. Okay. Dream lifer bird. Um, ask anybody in Central Park and they'll roll their eyes and tell you what my favorite bird is. Or certainly one of my favorite birds, which is the Blackburnian warbler. Now, you guys here in the West are blessed with a range of hummingbirds. God love you. But you got like 8 warblers. We in the East get 1 hummingbird, but we get, on a good day in Central Park, a great day in Central Park, you'll get 25 warbler species in a single day. Yeah, it's that good. And of those warblers, the Blackburnian is by far my favorite. It is, I actually had a close encounter with the Blackburnian once. I was birding in Central Park in this area I don't normally bird. Blackburnians tend to stay high, but this particular Blackburnian was at eye level here and this far away. And it was just sitting there and it was throwing its head back and it was belting out its song over and over and over again for about 5 minutes. And I could not move. All I could do was stare there and look at it. And if you don't know what a Blackburnian looks like, it's warblers, as most of you probably know, are smaller than sparrows, very active. I like to describe them as butterflies with personality. The Blackburnian is basically, you know, white and black and gray, but with a good male, it's got a day glow, fiery orange throat. I mean, incandescent. And so after that experience, I just had to, the only way I could express what that bird meant to me, what it told me about the world was, I like myths. So I wrote a myth that the sun got up in the morning one day, and in the course of the day, as it traveled across the whole world, looking down, it saw these incredible, wonderful, living things everywhere. Until finally, by the time the sun was sinking in the west and turning orange, it started crying tears of joy from everything that it had seen. And those flaming orange tears formed a big pool on the ground, but it wasn't lasting because it was evaporating, because it was made out of fire. So it was shrinking, it was going fast. And all these creatures came to see this incredible flaming pool. But they were too scared to go near it. It's for one tiny bird that had flown a long way to see the pool. And right before the pool of flaming orange fire was going to go away forever, it was so thirsty, it said, a gift like this should not be ignored. And it drank from the pool. And ever since then, the Blackburnian warbler's throat has glowed fiery orange from the flames of the setting sun lodged in its throat. And whenever it sings, the last note of the song slides high, because if you know the Blackburnian song, it is almost supersonic. And the last note sounds like the bird is being strangled and goes supersonic high. And that's the flames lodged in its throat trying to return to the sun. And everyone who sees it and hears it knows the joy of the sun at a world full of life. So that's what a Blackburnian is to me, anywhere. As far as what I want to see, oh my God, there are so many. But I would say right now, top of my list is great gray owl. I've never seen one, and I'm itching to see one. So yeah, but I'd have to go to someplace cold, and I hate cold weather. That's why winter in Palm Springs. Other questions? Yes. I'm there. I will take that. Yes. Oh gosh. Probably yes. It's sorry. Right. Repeat the question. Am I going to write any more comic books? For those who don't know, for many years I worked at Marvel Comics. I don't draw the comics, but I make up the stories. One of the things that came out of the incident in Central Park was that two of my former comrades at Marvel, who then were at that time were working at DC Comics, approached me about writing a comic book about that experience. And I was like, how do I turn that into a superhero story? And I really had no idea what I was going to do with that. And then they called me up again and they said, well, you don't have a story yet, but we have a title. It's a bird. And because it's DC Comics, it's play on Superman. It's a look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman. And as soon as they said the title, it's a bird, I don't know what happened, but a door flipped open and the story just populated itself in my mind. Not a superhero story, though it makes a vague allusion to maybe Superman vaguely, but it's a story steeped in magical realism, which is a Latin American tradition of literary tradition, where strange things happen without explanation and they're just part of the world. And it is a way of expressing sort of an unbearable reality that can only be accurately communicated by weaving the fantastic into everyday life. And that's what happens in this comic book. Is a young black kid gets a pair of binoculars that are handed down from his grandfather, and he's like, oh God, what am I going to do with these? And he goes out birding and he sees birds, but he sees other things as he looks through these binoculars. And I don't want to spoil it, but it is a comic. It's a very short comic story. It's only like 8 or 9 pages, and it is for free. It's available for free online. And it's called It's a Bird. So am I going to write more comics? Probably, because I had a lot of fun doing that one, but I don't have anything planned right this moment. So, more questions. Okay. Oh, down. Okay. So what other actions for conservation do I like to promote? I am a big fan of understanding that if we as individuals see something wrong with the world, it is our personal responsibility to do something to try to fix it. I am very impatient with the attitude that, oh yeah, oh, this is terrible what's going on, but what can I do about it? That's an abdication of your personal power, because so many of us don't realize how much power we have in any given situation. And, we're not always going to succeed, but it is our duty to use what power we do have to try to make a change. So specifically, in terms of conservation, what as individuals can we do? How many of you, raise your hand if you know what an ESCO is? Wow, interesting. All right. ESCO stands for Energy Supply Company. And in most states, I'm pretty sure in California too, certainly in New York, but in most states in the US, you get to choose where your electricity comes from. You're getting it from the same grid as everybody else, but the money you pay for your electricity will go to the energy company you choose. And there are green ESCOs, that is, energy supply companies that specialize in generating power solely through renewable sources like solar or wind or free-run hydroelectric. So if you make that choice to get your energy from a green ESCO, you're basically funding the growth of renewable energy instead of funding the burning of fossil fuels. And if everybody in the country picked a green ESCO, think about what that would do in terms of climate change. Because climate change is really the biggest threat to our birds and to us. There's a habitat loss on a whole bunch for a whole bunch of reasons. There's all kinds of threats to our birds from glass skyscrapers and all that. But the biggest threat to every living thing, including our birds, is climate change. So that's just one example of something we as individuals can do to help with conservation. So, more questions all the way up there. Oh, wow. Do I wish I could answer that question? Nat Geo has not told any of their shows whether or not they're getting another season yet or not. So they're clearly having, dealing with some issues on their corporate level. And until they resolve those, they're not letting us know what's happening. So I certainly hope we do, because we have big plans. We were already talking about, because for the first season, we were entirely domestic, including Puerto Rico and Hawaii. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, I had to go to Hawaii. but for the second season, you know, if we get one, we're hoping we get to go international, and that'd be a lot of fun. So, other questions? How are we doing on time? Oh, almost out of time. I can maybe take.
Mr. Cooper, we do have a question on Zoom, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the question is, as a Latina in a predominantly Latino community, I want to bring birding outings to the youth in my community. But where can I start, especially if that doesn't exist or it is accessible in my community currently?
That's a hard question. I mean, I want to say you can just, you know, go out and do it. You know, round up whoever you can and go out and make a birding effort on your own. One of the issues, because, you know, the United States is a very litigious society, is that, you know, you've got to have a lot of times insurance and various other, you know, institutional protections if you want to run a bird walk. So if you need those, if you can't just round up a bunch of people and say, hey, let's just go on an informal bird walk, excuse me. See if you can partner with another organization. I know New York City Audubon does that a lot. I know San Diego Audubon does that a lot, where, for example, New York City Audubon partners with Latino Outdoors, with Afro Outdoors, Outdoor Afro rather, and with the Feminist Bird Club. And those partnerships help bring, you know, new audiences to know about New York City Audubon, and that we are open to everybody. So if there are organizations in your area, see if you can partner with them to try to have a Latino birdwalk. Sorry, I'm having my eyes are kind of glazed by the light. So there is a question up here somewhere. Yeah. So I think partly an answer to the preceding question, but just generally, one of the ways you can try to bring more people of color in is by partnering with some of the offerings of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, of which I am a board member and of which you are active on their urban ecology. Shameless plug, Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the people who put Merlin in your pocket, goddamn them, making me obsolete. No, Merlin is amazing. It's not perfect, but it's amazing. But boy, does it make you feel like I spent all those years learning these bird songs. But yes, you can. They have a lot of resources available at Cornell, so you can reach out to them and see what you can get in terms of resources from them. I think we have time for maybe one more question. I want to go where I necessarily haven't been looking before. Okay, right there. Okay. Yeah. Yes, you. Hi. Okay, so the question is, have I set aside any time to do any birding while I'm here in San Diego? And also the point that your holy grail bird is a quetzal. 3 trips to Costa Rica before I saw a quetzal. The first one I went to Monteverde, where they live, and being the naive temperate zone birder, I'm like, I'm gonna go down there and the quetzals will be there because hey, it's the tropics. They don't migrate. Naive. I should have known better because migration is not about cold, it's about food supply. And sure enough, there are different things fruiting at different altitudes. So the quetzales are altitudinal migrants and move up and down the slopes. And when I was there, They'd moved down from Monteverde, no quetzals. Second trip to Costa Rica, I went to Osa Peninsula, which has no chance of getting one a quetzal because it's not in the highlands. Third trip was, I got married, didn't last, but I got married. And for our honeymoon, my husband decided he wanted to go to Costa Rica, even though he's not a birder. And I'm like, you really want to test this marriage out of the box, don't you? So I arranged for him, I negotiated with him one day that we would spend to try and find quetzales. So we went, it was like something like a 2-hour, 2.5-hour drive from where we were up to Cerro de la Muerte, the mountain of death. And we got up there and we had a guide who didn't know what he was doing, but happily there was a guide who was leading 2 other people nearby who knew what to listen for. And so we followed him, and there it was, the quetzal with the ruby breast and those 2-foot-long streamer tails hanging down and waving in the wind, and it was awesome. So you have a treat coming in store for you. Wait, what was the question? Oh, I've been birding in San Diego. Yes, yes. In fact, yesterday, most of the day, I was birding with 2 wonderful guides, Adam and Robert. Robert is a local biologist, and I did the border border birding walk, and it was awesome because, especially because I got a lifer, California gnatcatcher, which I had never seen before. So I was really excited by that, and they worked to get me that bird. And I got a glimpse of it, and I was like, it wasn't diagnostic enough. I don't really feel like I've seen the bird. So they kept at it and kept at it until finally I got like the black tail and I saw the female with the brownish back, and I'm like, now I've seen the bird. So yeah. All right, guys, I think, yeah, that's all we got time for. So thank you.